Senator from Florida.
Reserving the right to object. Let me first begin by saying this is the first time I've had a chance to speak on the floor about the Paycheck Protection Program since it passed. I want to say this unequivocally, that despite everything you read out there, in my mind, I don't think there's any question that by far this has been the most successful part of the CARES Act. To put it in perspective, this was something that we worked on in a bipartisan way. In less than a week, it was crafted. Then the agencies had less than 6 days to put together the rules. Until Friday, April 4th, no bank in America had ever made a PPP loan. No one had ever applied for one, and the SBA had never approved one. And it was a massive program. And if we look at the results, they're stunning, the results that we have seen. Now, does the program have problems? Sure. I think any time that you create something that spends $500, $600 billion that reaches over 50% of the U.S. economy and is put together so quickly, there are going to be unintended consequences, and I'll come back to that point in a moment. But I think the biggest problem this program has had from the very beginning, which created some of these tensions that we've read about in the press, is that it was underfunded from the very beginning. I mean, the demand is greater than the supply, even potentially right now after second round. You know, we've heard the reports about publicly traded companies. We all know how we feel about that, and I'm glad that that's being addressed now. I also want to put it in perspective. They have taken 0.35% of the funds that were approved, not 35%, not 3.5%, 0.35% of the money that's been lent. So it's not like they took half the money, which is what the perception that's been created out there in some of the coverage. Meanwhile, that means the rest of it went to somebody who's not publicly traded. So that's an extraordinary achievement nonetheless, and I'm glad that's being looked at. Now, on transparency, all valid points. Myself, Friday, Saturday, I was really upset that we weren't getting those numbers. And the reason why I want the numbers is, A, we want to make sure this program that we've put our name on and worked hard on, all of us have, is reaching its intended audience. B, the points that were made here as well, that to the extent that changes have to be made in any future funding, we want to make sure that that future funding is targeted in the right way. But the problem is that if we, and so I was as upset as anybody, and we may and I hope that the agencies are watching these proceedings now and understanding why it's so important that our members have accurate, detailed, and regular information about how this program is rolling out. What we do know when they finally release numbers on Saturday is that in round two, the average loan went from $206,000 in round one to $76,000 or so in round number two. That's a stunning drop. What it tells you is it's reaching smaller businesses. We do know that 72% of the loans made in round two were under $50,000, and that 85% were under $100,000. We do know that 4,400 of the 5,200 lenders in the program, or 5,400 lenders in the program, have less than $1 billion in assets. So we know that it's reaching the regional banks, the smaller banks, the credit unions. Now, in terms of some of the information, that the reason why doing what is being proposed here now would be problematic is twofold. The first is that some of the demographic data that's being asked is not on the application. So it's not even clear that they would be able to produce that for us unless they stopped the process, created a new application, and then began to process it as well. Now, we will know the answer to that question in the forgiveness phase. I do believe that in the forgiveness phase, it's very valid to ask that information on demographics be included in the forgiveness application that people are going to have to file. So I think the best path forward is, in my view, not to pass something like this today, although something like this may be necessary if we can't get these numbers. But let's find out first and foremost, what data points do they have? What data points does the SBA have at their disposal? And see if we can get them to do what they should be doing already, which is producing it on a regular, maybe not on a daily basis. What I don't want to see is an already overburdened agency that's small to begin with and is struggling to get all these programs going. I don't want to see them have to pull people off getting people money to fill out this information. And we have to understand, in the end, it isn't the administrator or the Treasury Secretary that's going to have to write these things up and collect it. It's going to be people that in many cases are working from home, living in this region under all the restrictions that are there. I just think this agency is already struggling to manage this massive program, and to add an additional requirement without thinking it through would have unintended consequences of potentially slowing the program down. So it's my view that we're going to find out all this information, and we're going to know it in a timely fashion so we can do something about it. I do not believe that passing this today is the right approach, given the fact that we first need to know what data they have at their disposal before we can ask them to produce it. Otherwise, I fear they're going to stop or they're going to slow down, and real businesses, small businesses and not-for-profits are going to be delayed. And so I will object to this request.